Well, I'm so happy to have you join us on the podcast today, Aaron. So, why don't we start off by sharing with me a little bit about your background in marketing and your path into higher education?
You got it. So I have done everything in marketing from building websites to SEO, all the way to running commercial shoots and a variety of things. I've endlessly curious, and so I've always chased experience wherever I can get it. So I find it's effective to build teams if you've had hands-on experience. And so I've tried to get that and try to maintain it as much as I can. Harder and harder with AI and all the other things going on and the evolution of marketing, which is exciting. But yeah, that I've done a variety of the agency side, in-house, but primarily have gone to places where I build teams and help transform and grow organizations. And I've done that across industries. So I've worked in a number of industries, including higher education. I took a break from higher education to work in healthcare and then made my way back a little hesitantly, but made my way back and been very happy to be at Alliant.
And what was that hesitation all about?
Yeah. So I love, like many who work in higher education, you come for the mission, the purpose. You've seen it transform your own life, your family's life. You see what it can do to communities. And so there's a passion and a heart there. And what I found, which is amazing, and you find that in other industries as well, where there's this mission, this vision statement. We do things differently. We're going to change things. But once you're on the inside and you're making change, they allow it to a certain point, but sometimes there's this hesitancy to really follow through. And quite often I'm making the hard decisions that require, I always think about it in two ways. There's the heart side of what we do, that mission, and there are so many good people with that heart. You also have to be able to have that impact long term, which requires kind of this operational rigor and thinking about the business financially sustainable. And so sometimes that requires accepting reality for where you're at and making the decisions that remove ego, kind of clear things out of the way. And I found that that's not always true. And so I was hesitant because Alliant on the surface said all these wonderful things like many organizations do. And so the question mark in my mind was, do they walk the talk as it said? So, and what I found was that they do. So as I explored the opportunity, obviously hesitant, but explored the opportunity to throw my hat in the ring to see if maybe this is something that I would take on. I talked to alumni. I tried to talk to as many people and do the research as I could to see what was there. What's the substance behind that surface level message and leadership. And I found a few things that really drew me in. The one was, the deeper I researched, the more substance there was. And that's usually the opposite, right? You get past a certain point and you start to tell that, all right, there's a misalignment between that mission and that vision and how they operate. But I also, I talk about the realities, embracing realities and evolving to the times so that you can do this for a long time, right? You can have the impact that your heart's drawn to for a sustainable, decades and decades to come. And I saw that in leadership over the last 10 years. They had made decisions that really were hard, and I imagine they were, but they made decisions to focus and to do things that were necessary to become financially viable and stable and to continue to do this work really well for a long period of time.
That's great. I love that you've had the awareness, both the self-awareness of what type of institution and where you wanted to work as a marketing professional. You want to work somewhere that's willing to make tough decisions, to embrace change, to be a leader, but also the awareness from your background in higher education on what a challenge it can be for these institutions to actually embrace the change that they want to make. And just this last week, our company worked on a campaign that a chancellor said he wanted to be dynamic, and out of a 1 to a 10, with 10 being like innovative and fresh and new, he wanted like an 8, and we gave him an 8 and he cut it back to a 2. And it's like literally like your campaign could now be for any college in the entire United States. I could slap on any name
Yes.
and nobody would know that it was yours. And it's so disappointing as a marketer when you're told, like, we're ready for change, we're ready for something big, we're ready for something different, and they're
Yep.
not ready. They're not, and it is very frustrating.
Yes, very much so. I've run
But
into
you
that
finally
numerous
found a
times.
place that is ready. And so I wanted you, for those listening that don't know about Alliant, like how did they show you that they're ready to do something different? And what has your role been in helping them achieve these differentiations?
Yeah, I think at its core, we always talk about we want to grow. Like I mentioned, I like to come in, build teams, we transform, we grow. I like to have that impact. It's satisfying, and I feel great about it, and that sense of accomplishment. But what I found with Alliant is they have evolved. I talked about that evolution, making hard decisions, which gave me a signal that they were willing to do things that may not always on the surface be easy. But they've done that evolution without sacrificing a core identity that they've had 100 years, and it's taken different shapes and forms on the surface. But this idea of being grounded in values, of who we are, does not change, even though the way we operate, locations, the name, that can all shift around us as long as that identity stays true. And so the way I approach it is, if we can align on that identity and we're aligned on what the impact is we're trying to have, are we open to what's around that? And you can't push, I also always said that you cannot drive growth, you can't force growth. If you think like a plant, whatever it is, you can cultivate the environment for growth, but you cannot force it. You can try to artificially push something. So sometimes growth does take a little longer than I'd like, and I've had to learn that throughout my career. But when the opportunity in that window opens, you have to take it immediately. And so sometimes we push it. Maybe it's a 6 or a 7 this time around to allow, because that's where we're at. Even though we might want a 10, we might say we want a 10, but maybe we're not ready. And it's using that judgment and that filter to say, we talk about a 10, but that's maybe we're not quite ready for that. Here's what gets us closer to that 10. And there is a tension, especially in higher education, with that legacy, we belong, but also standing out and being different. And that tension is something we've explored with lots of areas, including how we show up visually in the brand, but even advertising, commercials. How do we find that sweet spot in the tension of looking like we belong, but also being different? I think that's ultimately, that discomfort maybe is a little too far for some people, perhaps.
Yeah, I have so many great questions around this. I'm actually going to be doing a talk to community college trustees about how to break out of the sea of sameness.
Mm,
And at the end of the day, like, I just feel like people say they want to be different, but they don't. They just don't want to
they
be
don't.
the same.
They're not comfortable with it.
They're not. So how do you as a marketer get them to see what makes the institution special and different? I mean, it's there, but you have to help kind of bring it out and coax it out and have them recognize it.
Yes. Yeah. I usually start with, what do we say? Who are we? Who do we say we are? And then there's two sides of that. So there's first that question, but then there's the character side, which is, of those who know us best, do we show up that way? So are we really that? And as you do that research, you start to find out, okay, what's the common pattern? What's the common theme? Why did they choose, this institution or this organization? And why do they still love it? And what's the elements there? And then there's reputation, which is like how the world, kind of that perception on the outside. But first you focus on the character and the substance. But as you do that, you pull out, here's how we're different. And I think you have to have the discussion around, we have all these other things that are on our list, or we say we do well, or we're trying to do well. We want to be, the Walmart, we want to have all these products and program sets because that's what the large players do. And we want to be like them because that's how you scale. So you can go, big and broad. But you have to bring people along to say, here's how we're different, and then compare that against, the industry, and here's how we fit. And I think quite often many organizations look at themselves in isolation. They're trying to be everything, and we see each other as competition. But if you change the perspective and realize we're part of an ecosystem of like organizations, higher ed and otherwise, that are in some cases trying to solve the same problem. Like, our mission is aligned to solving the same problem. And if you see yourself as something that fits inside of an ecosystem, then you're a little more accepting that maybe this is where this is the specialty area that we're best at and we can lean into. And then we go deep in that area, maybe, instead of trying to be broad, or instead of trying to like, oh, this is nice. It's a current trend. We could jump on that. We need an AI degree or whatever it might be, a YouTube degree. But you have to have that filter. Who are we? What are we best at? And say, does that fit? Even though it's exciting, how does that fit inside of what we're doing? And so for Alliant, as an example, it's AI and mental health. Maybe there's something there where we can help mental health professionals, which we've been training for decades and decades, help them keep up with what's changing. That's how we fit with this current trend. And so I think it's surfacing it, but bringing people along and allowing the leadership group and the entire community that's involved to see ourselves in a very specific way. And sometimes it's just that perspective that helps kind of connect those dots. And then you can accept it. If this is true, then maybe this is true too.
I find I often reference this as killing students with kindness. Like there's so much, people want to do everything. Colleges we work with want to do everything and be everything for students, and because they really believe, in their mission and they love students. But by doing that, it's often not helping either the student or the institution itself. And there's so many shiny objects. There's FOMO going on. Like, we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to be this. And then they lose sight of what their actual mission is. And earlier in the conversation, you had referenced that, when you were looking at Alliant, you noticed they had made some difficult decisions. And I'm wondering if some of those decisions were around offerings or direction of where the college is going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. They were. So they eliminated all undergraduate degrees. We've now reintroduced nursing as part of the mission, very specific to preparing for professionals to fill roles where there's workforce shortage. And we focus on licensure primarily. So we've reintroduced one undergraduate degree, but they eliminated those. They've downsized the international locations over the years because they were not financially stable. We still support international students. We actually have growth in our international student population on campuses, but they had to make some of those decisions to say, how do we continue to thrive? Still, again, staying true to ourselves. We're still open to international. We're growing there. That's part of who we are, but maybe we don't need this location over here. And it's evolving with the changing times. When I think it was 2015-ish, it was like 1% of Alliant's population was online students. We're now over 60% and it continues to grow. So also just adapting to the time, again, being real and then making those hard decisions. They've done that continuously. And it's just, it's great to be a part of that. And
really big decision. I mean, eliminating undergraduate degrees, that's a hard decision to make, right? And I know that influenced the way what your job was coming in, because you've done a rebrand. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I think people are going to be really excited to hear about that process. But first, let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsor.
How do higher education decision makers find the right solution when technology evolves at light speed? Well, we usually start with our network. EdTech Connect is the network that's democratizing the higher ed technology conversation. EdTech Connect is free, so anyone with a .edu email address can sign up and list the software and services they use in their role at their school. Once you're in, you can find out what solutions similar schools are doing all over the country. Whether you're looking to find the hot new AI tool, or maybe learn options you have to upgrade your campus search engine, or even get to your short list of marketing solution vendors, EdTech Connect is the place to go. So visit edtechconnect.com and set up your free profile to get a pulse for what's happening with higher ed technology today.
All right, so before the break, we were talking about some difficult decisions that Alliant made. And I wanted to segue into how these decisions led into a rebrand of the institution. So tell us a story behind that. And I think you came in and was one of the first things that you led was this rebrand. It's like, welcome.
I was actually, yes, but I was also hesitant. I'm always careful about the substance behind the action. And so what I don't want to do is come in and be another marketing leader comes in and wants to change how we look. That absolutely. So I actually resisted it. In fact, it wasn't in the plans, and I would kind of push back on even the idea of anything remotely close to that. I wanted to surface the soul through storytelling. There was so much richness that, again, I had to dig in the beginning to find. I don't want people to have to dig, and so that's part of this process of the rebrand. That's actually what kind of led to it a little bit, is that gap. But first, we did that identity work. So who are we? Who do we say we are? And so we did some brand research, and then we audited how we show up. So not only the actions and some of the operational things that we offer, but visually. So campuses, how many different logos are there? Do people even know what it means? And we found that there was a gap between what we saw substance wise and how we were showing up in a unified, clear way around Alliant. And so, yeah, I was hesitant. I always resist it, but it kind of organically grew into that need. And then, yes, we led that. By the end of my first year here, we had all the brand research and kind of had this, I couldn't not explore it. So we explored it. And then that was last year's work.
But this is really important too. Like, you started by asking questions, right? Like, yes. We see a lot when our company gets hired for rebrands, it's usually, I would say 75% of the time, because there was a new college president, and that president has decided that they're going to rebrand, and that's going to be their mark. And those questions haven't been asked. So we'll have to come in and say, okay, we need to take a couple steps back and do research first. And there have been times when the research has shown, like, you don't need to be doing much different. But that can be hard for leaders to swallow too, because they want the shiny, they want the bright, shiny object.
Yes.
But you found opposite. I mean, you came in, you spent a year asking questions, and you found there was a disconnect. So what happened when the research pointed you in that direction?
So when I hire contractors or agencies, it's very specific, and I never want us to outsource strategy or ownership of anything, that certainly not a brand, right? And so as we went down that path, we compared everything against the current, right? So we have that. And the question wasn't, what's the new look going to be? It was, is there anything that better represents what we are against this current state? Again, grounding ourselves into the, who are we? And is there something that gets us closer to expressing that in a more meaningful way and getting credit for all the goodness that's underneath all of this? And we didn't outsource, so we didn't hire some big agency to come help us do this. I had a contractor, and then we worked with a very small group, a design group, that helped us with brand strategy and design exploration. And then the rollout itself was, well, that's another long process, because to do it right, again, there has to be substance. There always has to be a why for why change needs to happen. And if you can connect it to that, you talk about, hey, I want a fresh look. I think the question is why. Is it because you feel like it's stale, or it is, or it doesn't match something? But because I found that if you have the why, when you go through, and we did rounds of revision, many rounds. We went to every aspect of our community in this process to talk about it with them at various stages, because, as you know, a brand isn't just a logo. It is how we show up. It's who the institution is. And that's every experience and touch point. The visual identity is part of that, an important part of it. So we made sure we had the why, did the research, and then went through that process to make sure that we had everybody aware and took questions to continue to refine. And, as a marketer, you get a lot of, hey, why don't we do this? Everybody feels like they're a marketer. That comes up a lot. But I found that good ideas can come from anywhere. And so I'm always open to those if we're all together open to the fact that not every idea has to be executed. Some are tests someday, some are, that won't quite work, but appreciate it, or we'll explore it. Or in many cases, it's, I hadn't thought of that. That will help us refine this idea, and we'll get the best idea. And so that was months and months and months of work, even after the design was kind of settled with leadership. And we felt like, okay, this is something that feels right and reflects us. And you have the right idea when you continue to think about how it will have legs, which is how we ended up with the design we currently have. Is we're looking at various variations. And then there's something about this torch that we now have, and what it represented, and was actually based on the academic seal that Alliant had, the president's kind of seal. There was a torch there. So we just explored it. We're like, let's try this out. But it was comparing all these different designs and aspects. It was the ideas just started flowing. And that's when like a good idea is a good idea when it sometimes it's really obvious. And so that we kind of just kept rolling with it.
I think you said something really important that we all need to remember, especially in marketing, and especially when people bring us so many ideas, is that just because you don't use an idea doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. Right? We can
Right.
have a lot of good ideas, but sometimes they're just not right, or they're just not right for right now. I think
Right.
that's a really important lesson to remember is take all those ideas, take them in, but just because you didn't use them doesn't mean that they're bad.
Right. I always say, and I think I even heard this, I read it somewhere. I read a lot, so I always don't know where things come from. But I once read that the more ideas lead to the best ideas. I worked with a colleague that would start off kind of creative thinking with, let's get all the bad ideas out first, because those end up leading you to some other thing. So yeah, you don't have
Yeah.
to use all
And
the ideas,
having
but they'll refine your thinking and
and
maybe
being
get you
in
to
an
a place.
environment where you can share your bad idea, like, and
Yes.
and feel safe doing that. Sometimes those bad ideas do turn into really great things.
Yes,
Yeah.
they do.
I'm really curious too. You talked about closing the gap between who Alliant is and how Alliant was showing up. Do you have an example of some of the gaps that you saw that you uncovered in the research?
Yes, so what we found was the values that Alliant has held for, like I mentioned, many, many, many years. What we call them, what they might be called on the surface evolves over time, and different environments and kind of usually political environments can shift some of that too. But the values themselves were one of the top reasons people chose to come
Mhm.
to Alliant, and they felt them in various ways. And again, no organization's perfect, so not everybody feels it in the right way. When we notice it, we listen and try to close that gap immediately at the real level. But then you also, so when you came to the website, you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know that we have clinical psychologists in all the states in the United States, and they've been one of the largest producers of clinical psychologists and a pioneer in mental health, specifically in multicultural and underserved communities. And the stories that started to surface around the impact, faculty that have been through there and the impact, pioneers in their field still have them. And you couldn't sense that when you look at the website, or you don't get that, and you don't feel it. And I think, something that we've now termed surfacing the soul of Alliant is how do you get that up on the surface? And so we focused a lot on storytelling as a primary vehicle for that. We do podcasts now. That was something we initiated. We have over 7, and it continues to grow. And we've done a documentary film. We're doing short
Oh,
films. We'll continue to do more like TikTok style content to also highlight it. But that to me will, above all things, help close the gap to make sure that you'll see yourself, if you belong, if you're right for Alliant. Not everybody is, but if you're right for Alliant, you want to have an impactful career, you want really good training that's hands-on. It's not an easy process to get to there, but the heart's there, and you want the skills to go have the impact, and you're deeply embedded with values that you hold dear, and those align. You should see yourself in us very quickly, and so that's how we're closing the gap. There was also a lack of unity, shared values across multiple campuses, programs, and we had more in common than we did different. But there was still a very unique identity in many cases. And I feel strongly that unifying that will also bring that, surface that character and soul at every touch point, to know that we all belong in the same Alliant University as one unified front, after the same things in unique ways locally, right? Every community is different in their own way, but we have more in common than we do differences.
how fascinating. I was just thinking like, oh my gosh, writing down all these things about you have podcasts and you've got a documentary, and like what a great vehicles for telling stories. And so in the beginning of the podcast, you had mentioned that that's what you wanted to focus on when you came to Alliant, is the story.
Yes.
And you found some really great ways to do that. What other advice do you have to other institutions who are looking to tell their story better? What can they do? What lessons can they have learned from what you've done at Alliant?
I think you have to be clear with who you are. And I think that's also being honest with the gap between what you say you are and how you show up each day. Because, and this works at the personal level too, if you aren't honest with where you're at, you'll never have the right frame of mind to end up to where you want to be. And so that self-reflection, self-awareness, and the embracing and accepting reality of where it's at is the starting point to help close that gap. And then you'll see the stories will surface. And then, I mean, on the more tactical side, you just have to build the process, the talent, and the focus to be able to then have the vehicle to tell those stories. And, you know, we were very careful about the vehicles we chose. We didn't say, oh, we want to do film because I like filmmaking. We have different levels. And in some cases, it's getting our authoritative voices out there through podcasting, because we have so many intelligent pioneers in their field who have things to share. And we want to get them more out there. And so we could do videos, we can go film them, but why not create some kind of vehicle where that's an ongoing place for them to share that voice and that expertise? And we also have student stories, and sometimes those are short. They're quick because they're at a conference or they're on campus. And sometimes it's an amazing story that needs a little bit longer to tell. And so as they surface, like tactically, you just have to build the talent and the resources and focus to be able to do that quickly. You know, one of the core pillars, 3 of attributes as we built the team. I presented this when I first came into our board of trustees, but it's intelligence, creativity, and speed. And speed is really core. And speed is less about force and more about focus. And so it's not being busier, pushing harder. It is finding the right path and staying on that path to get to the destination quicker.
And part of being able to stay on that path is being confident, which gets back to making sure that who you say you are is who you actually are, and having confidence in that, both as a person, as a representative of your institution. Yes. That lets you make decisions quickly because you're confident in your decisions. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yes. You have a good filter for it very quick.
Exactly. You know. So in the last couple of minutes that we have, I did want to ask you about the brand rollout. Okay. You had mentioned that was like an entirely different beast. But was there anything that surprised you about the brand rollout, and any advice you would give to other institutions who are rolling out something new?
I think honestly, so I've been a part of, you know, a few of these, and what surprised me was it was actually better than I imagined so far. Not as many fires or things broken. Things rolled out pretty well, you know, not without bumps and bruises along the way. But it has been one of the best that I've been a part of as far as rollout goes. Immediate impact, zero downside essentially from performance standpoint, and only seeing upside. So that's oddly enough, that's what surprised me most. But I think
it's
part
not
of
very
that,
often, by the way, that you hear what surprised me was how good it was.
Yeah, well, because I was bracing for, you know, a lot of things. Like I said,
right.
I've got some battle scars, and so yeah, it went really well. And I think part of that is the team's focus on making sure that the rollout was for us internally as a community before we focused on this external shout, PR, hoot and holler type work. We focused on making sure it was real and making sure that we showed up. Like it's not just here's a new visual identity, but it is a commitment and a recommitment to who we are together as a community. And what are we doing to show up more intentionally by that in that way? And so we focus more on, you know, scavenger hunts, or, you know, what can we do for the community that activates this and gets it to the people who matter most to us before we start trying to look good to everybody else.
So what's next for Alliant?
Well, so Alliant has built the talent and skill to evolve. And so ongoing evolution, we continue to get focused on what we're best at, and we'll continue to do that. We'll lead with the heart like we do, and be financially responsible like they've done, especially over the last 10 years. They've been very smart about it. We'll continue to do that. With the federal policy and higher education regulatory changes, that does hit many of our graduate programs pretty hard. And so we've been, our president, Andy Vaughn, who I know you've talked with already and know, he was very active in DC during that process and stays very close to the pulse of what's going on. So we're fortunate that we're ahead of it. So we're helping students find alternative paths for how do you pay for college before it hits. That timeline's coming this summer for many programs. Are we making sure that we're getting the word out and people know ahead of time, because many don't, many institutions still don't. And so we're fortunate to be proactive that way and continue to do that. So we'll evolve with those changes to make sure that we continue to stay financially viable and that we can continue to have Alliant have the impact it has for the next 100 years.
Great. And I'm glad you mentioned Dr. Vaughn. He was on the podcast. He's actually episode 67. And so if you're interested, if the listeners are interested in learning more about Alliant, about what makes them unique, their differentiation, he spoke fantastically about that. It's actually one of our most popular podcasts to date. So Aaron, I can't help but pitch another episode. So maybe the two of you will break some podcast records.
Yeah, he's amazing. One of the reasons I chose to be at Alliant and continue to be here.
Wonderful. And for those people interested in maybe seeing some of your brand work or learning more about the process, how can they do that?
You can, I'm on LinkedIn. You're always welcome to reach out. Happy to connect and talk. If you go to our website, you'll see quite a bit there and how we show up now, which it continues to evolve. This is just the first step. But I think the best representation, so a new page that we put up, and it's alliant.edu/community-sparks. And that's where we start to tell these stories. You'll see the documentary we did last year, first of many stories we're going to tell. And you'll start to get insight into some of the other, we have Trevette's story, Rose, starting to surface these stories as we surface the soul of Alliant. So, and also a call to share stories, which has been our primary focus of the brand rollout, is there are stories to tell. Share those stories with us so we can tell them.
Wonderful. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking to you today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, I'll be watching what's next.
Okay. Appreciate it.